1, 2, setting up your meeting for Facebook Live. Here we go. Brilliant. Okay, so we are live now. Perfect.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you. I'm very happy to introduce Leah, who is here. She's a soprano. And as you all know, I had tongue tie surgery in January, and Leah actually had hers in November. Isn't that correct?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. So we found each other online as, you know, people kind of fall across your path and when you're looking for certain things. And we were both sort of researching tongue ties and singing with a tongue tie, singing after tongue tie surgery. And so Leah has a fantastic vlog on Facebook called Diary of a Tongue-Tied Singer. And she kind of chronicles her whole journey from discovery before her surgery and now her recovery process and kind of rehabilitating her voice. And there's a lot of information on tongue ties out there, but not really for singers, just kind of general information. So I think it's really important that we have this discussion because it's something, in my opinion, as I've been learning and experienced it myself, I cannot believe that this is not checked right away, like amongst all singers. I really can't believe this. And I think it will start to be done. So, because it really is it is a block to a lot of technical growth that is sort of not anybody's fault and not really something, it's just something that is happening in your throat that you aren't aware of. So I think that's where we're going to unpack in this discussion today about how tongue ties affect singing and what can be done beforehand to sort of prep you and
what needs to be done after a tongue tie surgery to sort of rehabilitate the instrument. So I just want to kind of bring Leah on to talk and maybe share your story.
Sure. Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. It's like such a joy on this journey to connect with somebody like Julia, have so much in common, and then also this kind of newly found passion for bringing awareness to this tongue tie issue, and kind of more on that later. But I have been singing seriously for 20 years and studying consistently that whole time. Had wonderful voice teachers all through my degrees. I have an undergrad in voice performance, an MA and an MM in voice performance, and have taught professionally on the collegiate level voice and also performed professionally. So all along that 20-year journey, there has been a great amount of struggle. And I would look at my colleagues around me, and we know we're not supposed to compare, but I would see how I was working every bit as hard as they were. And I don't want to diminish their hard work because anybody that's in this industry is working hard. But they would work so hard, and I would see that I was working just as hard, but I was making a fourth of the progress. And I over, that 20 years, I mean, even as recently as, a year or two ago, when I would sing for a conductor or when I would have a coaching or when I would have a voice lesson, there were things that I heard over and over and over again. And it wouldn't matter how methodically, how carefully, thoughtfully I addressed those things on a consistent basis. I'm not talking about like one practice session. I'm talking about hundreds of practice sessions, day in and day out, how I would address those issues to seek to gain freedom around them. And the next time I opened my mouth to sing, it was like I had never done that exercise before. It was like I had never tried to accomplish that particular goal or gone through that particular process before. Now, all of that is not to say that I didn't grow. Obviously I did. I got the degrees and all of that, but there were areas in my voice where I reached a certain point and then there was no getting beyond that. It was like a brick wall. So for example, I had enormous difficulty pronouncing certain sounds correctly. So there were certain pure vowels, and specifically they were the vowels that required an arched tongue in the mouth. So those pure vowels, when singing, I had enormous difficulty pronouncing with clarity. And if I could pronounce at the onset of that vowel, if I could get my tongue in the right position, I could not sustain it. So as a full lyric soprano, a lot of my rep has those long sustained lines. That is a requirement, that you can maintain the integrity of a vowel sound throughout the entire duration of that particular note. So that was a big complaint. Certain consonants derailed me. I don't know how else to say it. Consonants like k, g, consonant blends would completely, in order to create that sound, it would be like I would be singing along and I would have to stop, make the sound, and then re-engage. Again, it was not possible for me to create those consonant sounds in the flow of a text. So when you're seeking for legato, this is a big issue. This is a big issue when you're seeking for as much freedom as possible in the neck, as much freedom as possible in the larynx, to have to use the kind of pressure that I had to use in order to get those consonants out. That's something that diminishes the freedom. So there was an issue with articulation. There was I also had big issues with laryngeal stability. So I would hear comments and it felt like I was always either on one side of the spectrum or on the other side of the spectrum. I would hear comments that would say, okay, we need to hear clearer diction. We need to hear more ping in the sound, more ring in the sound, however you want to call that. We need more squillo essentially in the sound. And then I would work to get my tongue in a position that would allow for that, but my larynx would raise. And I would hear, okay, keep that vowel production, but you need to relax your larynx. And then I would relax, in order to relax my larynx, I would have to relax my tongue and the sound would fall back. And I would hear the sound is too dark. Your larynx is actually depressed now. And I could not, it was very, very difficult for me to find any kind of a balance where the larynx was in that relatively comfortably low position that we want for free phonation, while still being able to have the tongue in the right position for creating certain sounds. So for me, it was always a trade-off. If I'm going to use my tongue to be clear as I articulate, the larynx is going to be high. Period. As a result of that, my voice would fatigue very easily. As a result of that, the extremes of my range, particularly the top, and as a soprano, you can imagine that this was discouraging, but particularly the top would be inconsistent. I couldn't always count on it. Julia and I had a conversation the other day and I said, really for me to get the top, and I'm thinking, B flat, B natural, high C sharp. For me to have any quality sound there, every single note approaching those upper notes would have to be done exactly perfect. So I developed a working technique that was very, very mechanistic. I would have to muscle, and I hate to use that term, but I would really have to muscle my voice into a very, very precise alignment in order to be able to sing things with a degree of effectiveness. So I heard a lot of things through the years of like, wow, your voice is really beautiful. This is a world-class instrument, but you really need to develop more consistency in your upper register. You really need to develop more laryngeal stability. You really need to develop more consistently pure vowels. We know that developing pure vowels that has acoustic implications, that allows for greater resonance, these kinds of things. I had a lazy soft palate. It seemed like no matter what I did, I couldn't keep my soft palate up all the time. So these are just some things that I struggled with. And over the years, Gosh, there was so much discouragement because I mean, if you've dealt with this issue, you know how discouraging it is to work and work and work and go to a lesson or go to an audition or sing for a conductor and have them tell you the same things that you've been hearing as if you had not been working on those exact issues for years. You know, I wouldn't say I was at the end of my rope. I was still working, you know, when I discovered the tongue tie, but learning about the tongue tie provided clarity around all of these really and truly, either in a primary or in a secondary way, all of these kind of chronic struggles that I'd had in my singing that I hadn't been able to overcome. Again, it's not that there's no ability to improve, but overcome them completely. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's really great. You went into a lot of depth, which is important to hear. I think somebody wrote that listening to your story is literally like taking the words out of my own mouth. Wow. Yeah.
Oh.
And it's really interesting to hear about this, because sometimes I know for myself, like your journey is very similar. We had pretty much very similar manifestations. And I don't know about you, but I'm like, I live and breathe technique. Like, what is wrong when things aren't working? Like, what is,
yes,
like, am I defective? Like, you know? And when we had and like you, I developed a very, very, you know, precise working technique. But you know, going down this journey a little bit, and when I brought Amanda on, who is the myofunctional therapist in this group, you know, not maybe like 6 months ago, and I'm watching her presentation and I'm going, like, holy crap, do I have a tongue tie? Like, and I asked her right after, I was like, wait, do I have a tongue tie? And she's like, well, let's do this test. Let's see. And she's like, oh yeah, you do. You have, like, you know, quite a good one, right? Like, oh my God.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Right. And in that moment, I'm like, get it out of me now.
Yeah, snip, snip.
I'm like going with the kitchen knife. Honey, can you take care of this? But no.
Every myofunctional therapist is dying right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that there was a bit of feeling like that. For me personally, I didn't feel one bit of hesitation. As soon as I heard that diagnosis, I was like, I'm getting it snipped. But I do know that there's a lot of people out there, a lot of clients that I work with, and also anecdotally, singers are scared about having this done, right?
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Yeah, who's it?
I just want to cut it out.
I keep saying I just want to cut it out. Yes.
Been there.
Exactly.
I can feel that.
Yeah. And, you know, singers are scared because there is a little bit of, you know, even my husband said to me, oh my God, is your sound going to change? And I'm like, look, even if it does, like this, I don't care. I'm like, just make it easier, like make it easier. And, you know, I do think now, I mean, we'll get to the post tongue tie surgery in a minute, but I do think it really hasn't fundamentally changed my sound. However, so in that process of discovery, okay, should you get the surgery or should you not? Bryce, who we've had here on the group, kind of takes a little more holistic view of it. And he's like, well, you know, discover, like, if that's something that you really want to do. If you don't want to do that, that's totally okay too. And, you know, you don't have to get it done, essentially, is what he's saying. Like, you could still be an excellent singer without it. I want to ask you that question. Okay. What's your take on that?
Right. Okay. So of course, this is personal, right? This is so personal. This is an instrument that we carry in our bodies. So there's a lot for singers wrapped up in identity. There's a lot for singers. I feel like my vocal journey is inextricable from my life journey, if that makes sense. So, so maybe you would have to have an experience similar to mine to have this feeling. But if you have sat at the piano for 20 years praying for answers, and I mean that like literally praying, God, what is going on? Because I feel instinctively that this should be easier. I hear that it should be easier. I feel like a fraud. I'm a voice teacher like you, Julia. Technique became my jam. It became my specialty because I was on a search to learn what my instrument needed, to operate in its fullest capacity, at its freest. So to have a dental hygienist, and this is how I found out, because I was at the dentist because I was a chronic teeth grinder, which is one of the very common symptoms. Bruxism is a very common symptom of tongue tie. I was at the dentist for some dental work that had been that had needed to happen because of my teeth grinding, and I said, "Look, how do I solve the teeth grinding?" And she said, "Let me look under your tongue," and she saw that I was tongue tied. And then I'm just telling you, because as singers, if we're kind of obsessed with technique, everything circles back to that. So I'm starting to think about tongue being connected to the hyoid bone. This hyoid bone is this floating bone that every movement it makes has the potential to impact the larynx and laryngeal position. And I am starting to check off these boxes in my mind of all of the struggles that I've had. So there was, when I say there was like zero hesitation, there was zero hesitation and 100% commitment to seeing this through. Because I felt like what I knew of my own singing and the issues that were presented in my own singing, the areas of tension, and the potential for this release to allow me finally to make progress in these areas, it felt actually like a lifeline. It didn't feel like a gamble. It didn't feel like anything. And yes, I had developed a working technique, but it was not one that I was 100% satisfied with. Even when people around me were satisfied, I always felt in my spirit, in my singer's intuition, this is not it. This is not it. This is not the singing that I am capable of. And so it was like a puzzle piece that made everything else make sense for me. So I respect every singer's freedom, to choose for themselves what serves them best on their vocal journey. I think my obsession with technique and my understanding of the anatomy of the vocal mechanism gave me a lot of comfort, because I truly felt that if the vocal mechanism could be freed by the release of this tongue tie, even if my sound changed, it would be for the better. And that my experience is that it has opened up my sound, but I still sound like myself, just more color and with more freedom. So I believe that there are a lot of options. It's not release or nothing. So myofunctional therapy can help, can provide maybe greater freedom than a singer has had up to that point. Greater range of motion, greater mobility, greater stability. For myself, I know that what I ultimately was seeking would not have been possible with just myofunctional therapy. I needed to go the whole 9 yards. I needed to do the release as well. I agree with Bryce. It is a holistic thing. Okay. Despite how we felt, it's not just snip, snip, right? There is kind of a process. But for me, there was no hesitation. For me, there was no fear actually at all in moving forward. So, that's just my personal experience. And my advice is, even if you are afraid, even if you have concern, because your voice is a precious thing, it's a precious, unique thing, and you are the steward of it, have a consultation. Have a consultation with a myofunctional therapist. Do some research. At least explore it. Because, in my experience, it is absolutely 100% one of the best decisions I've ever made, period, in my life, and definitely for my singing.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I will say, for those of you who are looking into this, there are a couple, and we'll share some resources with you all. I know I've shared them in the group before, but we'll share more as well. You will need, as a singer, you will need a myofunctional therapist in addition, because if you just rely on the surgery alone and don't correct some of the habits that were formed, you the worst that can happen is the tongue tie will kind of like reattach. Yeah. And you won't gain that flexibility of movement in the tongue that is so essential. So you may have a free tongue, but it may not be doing what it's supposed to be doing, and you might not find the effects. Wait, there's a question. Is there a difference between a myofunctional therapist and a speech pathologist? Yes.
Yes.
Big difference. The main difference is, so speech pathology is really about how you make the sounds. A myofunctional therapist deals with things like swallowing, breathing, sleeping, those kind of disorders. So basic mouth functions and basic tongue functions that are responsible for those elements, like eating, sleeping, things that help you live. A speech pathologist would really like hone in on how are you making your sounds. And so my myofunctional therapist does recommend, if she feels if I feel I need it, to go to a speech pathologist in addition. I haven't done that yet, but I'm not saying I won't do that. I might. We'll get into that discussion in a second. But I know Leah and I are both in myofunctional therapy, and we're both post-op, but we're still continuing with exercises consistently. Let me ask you another question. So do you feel leading up to the surgery, did you have any issues with maybe a tendency towards thicker phonation, a tendency towards like the head voice access was tricky?
Yes, absolutely. So many times I would get up through that upper passaggio, and I would have teachers tell me lighter. It's a lighter adjustment. You just let the weight fall away. And they would say it like it should be an instinctive thing. Like you should instinctively sense how to do this. And then I would just come off my voice. So then it would kind of become almost choral sounding, like, and they would say, no, not that. Just take the weight off. And I had no idea. In fact, I would often, my way of doing it would be to lift the larynx further. I mean, I really did not have a sense for that. So I had a very, and that it's one of the things that has always been commented on in my voice, like a very, very rich, well-developed middle and low voice. Yeah. But transitioning that adjustment into the upper voice has always been very difficult, very problematic. And so as a result, I had very little flexibility in the top of the voice. So in terms of dynamic flexibility, messa di voce, things like that were incredibly difficult for me. Pianissimo singing, I mean, was very difficult. It's not that it was impossible, but very difficult. I have to work very carefully over a long period of time to train some muscle memory to allow me to do that. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think, some of you know a little bit about my journey and why we started talking about this even in the first place here in this group is I was obsessed. I became obsessed with the tongue and the tongue position on my own. On a YouTube, you go on like YouTube rabbit hole searches, right? Yeah. And I was like desperate to find some answers because I did have this sense that in my singing, I hit this wall a few years back where like my tongue was just, I felt like something was off. So I discovered this thing called mewing, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It's a big topic on YouTube. So if you search up mewing, you're going to get lots of interesting guidance there. And it's really hot apparently in the model community. I didn't know that, but they talk about this a lot. Yeah. So you'll get that kind of stuff on YouTube.
Wow. Okay.
I started watching some videos and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to try this for the heck of it. So I just started trying it, right? Like every day. And it changed my singing. Even just that, like before the surgery, before I even knew I had a tongue tie, changed my singing so drastically. And so I was doing essentially some aspect of myofunctional
therapy, right?
Yes, without knowing what I was doing. And that, you know, maintaining that tongue position. So I started doing tongue exercises and this and that. And I do feel like that really did help. So, you know, people who are sitting there going, oh, I don't know if surgery's for me, you know, I of course, I'm a believer in everybody should have surgery if that's an available option, right? But just know that I definitely found a ton of freedom doing that, those steps. So,
Yeah.
you know, that is another option as well. Like everybody has to kind of make that decision for themselves. So I would say that that was my experience with that. Now let's go. Y'all have, I don't know if you've seen, I've actually posted my surgery video so you can see it in its entirety. But Leah, let's have you, like, because I'm one person, so let's have you
Sure.
talk about, like, is it painful at all? Is it scary?
Okay. So if you're just new to this tongue tie thing, there's a book that I recommend. It's called Tongue Tied by Dr. Richard Baxter. He doesn't talk about adults a lot. He is primarily a pediatric dentist, but he has literally written the book on it. And there's a lot of really helpful information in that. So when I first found out about my tongue tie, my dental hygienist said, there is no one in Louisiana, that's where I live, there's no one in Louisiana who will do a tongue tie revision on an adult. And she said the closest person is a guy named Richard Baxter, but you would be in really good hands because he wrote a book on it. So I went to Dr. Baxter for my release. I cannot say enough good about him. Even his like bedside manner, you know, his way was so kind. You would feel heard if you went to him, you know. So the way it went was, and he works with a laser. So there's a couple different ways that you can have a tongue tie revised. It can be done with scissors, and it can also be done with a laser. And there's some debate about which is best. I think what I've taken from the conversation is, bottom line, it needs to be someone who is very experienced with that particular medium of surgery. Okay. But Dr. Baxter literally just won an award for his laser work. So that's his specialty. And he did give me like a numbing shot. I had both my tongue revised and I had my lip tie revised because I was also super restricted in my upper lip. And so the shot, I'll be honest, you guys, the shot was the thing that hurt the worst in the whole procedure, which is not to say that it hurt very bad. It was a sting, you know, and gave it a little bit of time to numb up. And then he went to work with the laser. During the actual procedure, during the actual release, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel any pain. He did use sutures, and there seem to be some studies that show that sutures are a really good way to go. Again, it doesn't mean that it's the only way, but he did suture me afterwards. I had 6 stitches under my tongue. He did not suture the upper lip, though. That remained open. The most pain came that evening. So I had it done that night. And that evening, it hurt. And not the worst pain I've ever experienced, but it hurt. It hurt to swallow. I like tried to drink a milkshake because I was starving, and that was really slow going, and that was painful. But I will say, like, I took some things to help alleviate the pain, and I slept great that night. In spite of like being in pain when I went to sleep, I slept wonderfully, like the most sound night of sleep that I could remember in recent memory. And the next day when I woke up, because I had it done in the afternoon, the next day when I woke up, it was still tender, but probably 50% better. Mm-hmm. I actually went, I'm not advocating this, but I drove to Alabama, had my tie revised, slept in hotel, got up, drove home that next day, and went immediately to a worship rehearsal at church and sang. And actually the singing itself was painless. I didn't have real issues with the singing. Really, the most painful thing in the first few days was eating, that because you're moving the tongue a lot when you're eating. I didn't even realize how much, but so that was the most painful thing. So I was on kind of a liquid diet for like 3 days. After that, no pain. Everything was pretty much business as usual. So I don't feel like I'm exaggerating to say if it had been 5 or 10 times more painful, it still would have been worth it, and I'd still do it again. So it is, and everybody's different, but it is painful. But it is also the kind of pain that I felt like I used some holistic things, and I also took, like, I think what he suggested was a leave. I took one, and it really greatly reduced the pain. So it was not unbearable at all.
Yeah.
And
no,
and it didn't scare me. He kind of talked me through. He told me as he was doing it, okay, now I'm doing this, now I'm doing this, now I'm doing this, and just made me feel really at ease.
Yeah. I would say for me, like, I would probably, because I would expect, a certain amount of pain, like just like a headache kind of pain. So I would say if you're just expecting like no more than headache kind of pain, then there really is, for me, there wasn't any actual pain. Like besides, I needed to take some Tylenol and ibuprofen for that kind of like that aching. It's more like aching and like
it is.
Yeah. But the procedure itself, and for some reason, my shot, I didn't even feel it. I think they numbed, like they
actually numbed where they,
right. So I'm like, I didn't feel that part, but that's what I think happened. So, there's a range of basically no pain to like a little bit of pain. So it's really not that bad. I know, I just want to be really transparent too, because I know price is something people like really think about and really, so like so what I paid was with the visit, with like the first visit, the consultation with the doctor, and the actual tongue tie release, I think it totaled with those 2 visits and then the follow-up all together was like $695. And I got mine done with a wonderful doctor who trained under Dr. Zaghi, who kind of did this method. And her name's Dr. D at Sweet Tooth Dentistry in Tampa, Florida. So those were her prices, which I found was very reasonable. That was without insurance. I was just self-paying. So Leah, do you remember how much?
Yeah. And I don't mind talking about it either. So because I had tongue and lip revision, mine was closer to 1,000. I also paid out of pocket. And Dr. Baxter is also Zaghi trained. So if you've been much in this tongue tie community, Dr. Zaghi, his name is said with great reverence, because his institute, the Breathe Institute, is really the foremost one doing a lot of research around this issue. And his method of revising adults is brilliant. And so really, I feel like most everybody who's doing it really successfully is getting their information from him and getting training from him, but because he's brilliant. So so my, the actual procedure was around $1,000. And then my myofunctional therapy, which I purchased a package of like 22 hour-long sessions with my myofunctional therapist, was like $1,800. So under 3,000. I also did not use insurance. It's also just like out of pocket. But I mean, worth it. Totally worth it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we move on to singing post tongue tie surgery, I'd love to open up the floor. Does anybody have any questions? You can type them in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Does anybody have any questions about like pre-tongue tie?
I have a question. So I'm definitely getting the surgery as soon as I can because I've already talked to Amanda, actually.
And
awesome. She said, yeah, for sure, you have a tongue tie. It's not a question. You should get it dealt with. My problem is that I live in a place that there is nobody near me. So I'm in Italy right now, and the closest person would be Germany or Spain. So I have to kind of think about logistics, especially in these wonderful times. So so in terms of like going for the first visit, having the surgery, and then having the follow-up, how much time do you actually have to sort of have access to that person? Like if I were to plan, kind of a long trip to do this specifically for this, what amount of time needs to be allotted for that?
So I'm going to answer that first, just because I did travel. So like I went to Tampa, which I was staying in Florida with my family in Orlando at the time, but I did go to Tampa, and that was like 2 hours away. I had a video consult with her first. So it took away that first visit in person, and she was more than willing. She's like, I don't normally do this, but I'm totally willing to do it. So we did that first. Then the very first time I met her was at the surgery. She did ask me to stay a week so that I went for a follow-up the week after. But she did tell me that if that absolutely wasn't possible, we could maybe schedule that like a few days after instead of like, a week later. But I said, no, it's no problem since I'm already in Florida. It's only a 2-hour drive. So I did go the week after. But I think you could probably make it like a 4 or 5 day thing if you had to. That's my perspective. I don't know, Leah, what do you think?
So I, because I also traveled, it was like a 6-hour drive for me. Dr. Baxter's office, what they did was they referred me to a myofunctional therapist for a diagnosis, essentially an official diagnosis. So, and then they worked with my myofunctional therapist. So I didn't meet Dr. Baxter until the day of my release. He also looked in my mouth and confirmed, but his diagnosis was exactly the same as my myofunctional therapist. I had a pretty severe posterior tongue tie. So, so I had the revision, stayed that night, and he called me actually that night, make sure I was doing okay, and offered me, he usually does a follow-up a week later. But essentially what he said was, you can video with me, or you can just stay in contact with Jennifer and let her see you. And if she feels like there's any issues, then you can come back for a follow-up. And Dr. Baxter, I think a lot of providers, if there's any need to go back in and do a little work after the fact, that often is free. So if I had needed a further release in some way, that would have been free, but I didn't. So I just stayed in close contact with Jennifer, my myofunctional therapist, a couple of times in that first week, kind of got up in the camera and let her look under my tongue and see how things were going. And so it kind of removed that need to stay in exactly the same area. But I guess every provider would probably be different. So you could ask them, a lot of people are doing things online now more because of COVID. So, you could probably ask them to see if it would be possible for you to just go, for a couple of days to have the procedure done.
Okay, so just to be clear, you never went back to Dr. Baxter
Nope.
for a follow-up. It was just all through video. And your therapist is also through video, or do you see her in person?
No, I don't see her in person. She's virtual. Yeah, so she lives in Washington. We do everything on video, and it's been super successful, super easy. So that's what we did. Now, typically Dr. Baxter does see people a week after. But because I was traveling and I was long distance, I think he kind of we just arrived at something a little bit easier and said, okay, if you need to come back, you absolutely can, but just, stay in contact. So we did communicate a lot that first week, but I didn't really, so he did such an amazing job that there was no need actually to see him again.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and you know what? Kristen wrote that she's in Spain and would have to travel to Madrid because that's where the Dr. Zaghi trained doctor is at. I wonder if that's the same doctor that Amanda found for you.
It is.
That's awesome.
There's like nobody here in Europe.
Wow.
So look, Kristen, you guys can do a tag team.
That's true. That's true.
I've been
You
doing
guys could
research, and I obviously was looking at the Breath Institute website and watching all of your videos, both Julia and Leah, and sending them to my mom, which, by the way, she loved your video, Julia. She watched the whole thing and live tweeted to me. But I'm glad to hear that someone else was suggesting this doctor in Madrid. I can't remember his name right now, but that's actually really helpful. But I
Yeah.
did have a question. Julia, in your surgery, was your myofunctional therapist there with you or no?
She
I
wasn't.
wasn't sure. I watched so many videos that now I'm like sort of
Confused.
I've seen that in some surgeries, the myofunctional therapist is there to kind of like feel the release or to help kind of see how much
That's cool.
needs to happen.
There
Is
is.
Something that either of you have heard about?
I have heard about that, but I do think that in the case of these doctors that are Zagi trained, they almost have that knowledge already. Yeah. So I definitely felt like Dr. D was so holistic. Like she made me go and get myofascial release in my mouth and in my neck before and after. She even set up the appointments for me. She was like making me do my exercises while she was doing the release. She's like, okay, suck and hold, like to measure. And so she knew what she was looking for. And she also, my doctor had a tongue tie revision as well. So she really was intimately acquainted with that. I do think the Dr. Zagi doctors do know how to do that on their own, but it is cool if you have your myofunctional therapist in there as well.
That is cool. I hadn't heard about that, but that is really cool.
Yeah. So I think that they're basically ours were pretty much similar. And like, had I not gone that second follow-up, everything would have been
It would have been
like,
fine.
totally.
Yeah.
Like it was just a touch and go. Oh yeah. Like you haven't gone down any. And well, I will tell this funny story because my myofunctional therapist, she's very holistic and, you know, like, especially after the surgery, she's like, let's not push, don't push yourself. And Dr. D, when I went up for the follow-up, I was like, you know, I'm a little concerned because I've gone down in millimeters. So just to be clear, my measurement pre surgery was 23. When
mine too.
Yours was 23. Look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I received a release up to 38 post-surgery, but then when I went back, it was down to like, I think 35, and I was getting concerned that it was like retracting. And so Dr. D just said, she's like, take your tongue and stretch it. And if it bleeds, then you'll know you've gone too far. And I was like, okay, like, all right. And she's like, just you can go till it hurts. Just stretch that thing out. So I did what she said. And now my release is at 41. So
Right.
I went from post-surgery was 38. Now I'm 41 consistently and like fully healed. So I do think that it is important to be stretching afterwards. You know, I mean, obviously do whatever your myofunctional therapist tells you, but I do recommend going for it and pulling that tongue. I even woke up in the middle of the night and did it. So it didn't reattach.
Yeah, absolutely. Jennifer, my myofunctional therapist, gave me a list of exercises to begin the day after. And they did not feel good. I had the lip tie. So there's a lot of like this kind of, this kind of a thing. And it didn't feel good, but it felt better after. So every time I would do, you know, and pulling the tongue, doing the point of the tongue, caves, you know, these kinds of things. Every time I would do them, they would hurt in the beginning because it would kind of stiffen up a little bit as it was healing. But when I would do them, then I would gain more range of motion and it would feel better. It would minimize the pain and the discomfort and the stiffness actually. So yeah, agree. Definitely do the stretches for sure.
Yeah.
I have another question. How long, okay, we've been talking a little bit about myofunctional therapy. How long did both of you do it before your surgery and after? I mean, I know you're both still doing it post, but how long are you planning to do it for, or what did both of your doctors recommend?
Okay. So I did 10 weeks of myofunctional therapy before. And the way we did it was we just started with myofunctional therapy and Jennifer said, I'll tell you when you're ready for the release and then we'll schedule the appointment. So I didn't have an appointment for a release at the beginning, if that makes sense. And then for the first 6 weeks after my release, I had appointments every week. And then now for the past, I don't know, a couple months, it's been every other week. So I have a feeling in the package that I purchased originally that I only have a few more left, but I think I'll keep up with it through this year for sure. Even if it's just once a month, just to keep working toward that correct function.
Yeah. Yeah, I did, and I'm not sure if this is like universal, but I know Amanda had me do 5 weeks of therapy before, so we set up my appointment right away. But I do wonder if that's because I'd been doing a lot of like these
Already.
exercises. I don't know if so. I don't know if that's particular for Amanda, how she works, or if that was just in my case, but it was 5 weeks. And then afterwards, I think I'm continuing. It's a total of like, I think 5 months, essentially. I think there were like, I really don't remember. There's like 18 sessions, I think, for me. And most of them are every 2 weeks, but right after the surgery, I think I did meet every week for like a few weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think it's tailored to you and what your providers feel like you need.
Yeah, exactly.
I think mine was long. I think 10 weeks before a release is on the long side. That's longer than a lot I've heard. I've heard like 4 to 8 weeks is pretty normal. So I was a little bit outside that, but I had some tongue dysfunction. So I needed that work.
Oh, okay, Celeste said my myofunctional therapist does 8 weeks pre-op. Okay, I think they're all a little different. Yeah. Okay, so there's totally, yeah. Nola.
Hi, thanks so much, Leah and Julia. Leah, I was wondering, I've been diagnosed with both a tongue tie and a lip tie also.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, did your therapy also include lip exercises? And did you notice a lot of changes because of that?
Okay, so yeah, huge actually. So I did have a lot of therapy. Mainly it was like things like taking like rolls of cotton and sticking it like up under my lip to help stretch out that upper lip. I would do exercises to we called it the spaghetti exercise. Anyway, it was this long string, like a shoestring almost, with wooden blocks on the end, and I would have to put the tip in the tip of the string in my mouth and pull the blocks up using only my lips. So it would be kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
So because I had such a restricted lip, these muscles here, they just didn't work in a forward embouchure motion. Okay, so if you have this, you may have heard a lot. Why is your mouth always in a spread position when you sing? Maybe not, but I always got that comment.
Yeah, and I get to, I pull down my upper lip often as I sing O and oo vowels instead of going forward. Yeah.
Right. So that was always an issue with me. And I would work, but it would actually physically hurt to move my lips forward at all when I sang. So to create, that more rounded shape for the vowel. But anyway, the lip release, I feel, has done almost as much for me in my singing as the tongue release. It's allowing me to create just the correct mouth positions in a relaxed way for those vowels. And then I also think any restriction here, tension period is a resonance eater, right, in singing. So this tension, I really feel like it trapped my resonance a little bit, and I don't know all the reasons behind that, but freedom here, and then there was also a freedom here in the cheeks from that release, has really allowed me to get without compromising the larynx, more of a bite in the sound that we're looking for. So super helpful. Cannot recommend it enough. Lip release is super big.
Okay.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool to hear. Kristen.
Sorry, I have so many questions. I'm trying to take advantage of the fact that you're both in a room right now with me. Okay, so Leah, you said that you had like a worship rehearsal like the day after. Julia, when did you go back to singing? And do you, both of you, recommend getting this done when you are like not needing to do as much singing, maybe like when you have a break? Because right now I'm trying to sort of plan when I could get this done, but right now until like July I'm kind of really busy. So I'm thinking maybe early autumn. But of course I'm like I said earlier, I just want to quit.
Yeah. So I literally like right after the surgery, I went into the car and I was like, Mom, give me a moment. And I just went into the car and I started singing and I was like, damn, wow. Like I could literally do things. I'm like testing out my new wheels. Like it was awesome. But then hold on, because we're getting to this part of the discussion. I hit a wall and I think I was like feeling on top of the world for like the first 2 weeks. I'm like, everything's easy, everything's amazing. Then like the cracking started, and like Demetra knows this because I would talk about this in our group. I was like, oh my God, like now the cracking, all sorts of things were going crazy. And I had set up a recording at this really great recording studio in Orlando. And I had just done a recital there and I like loved the recording. It was so beautiful. I'm like, okay, well, I did my recital right before, 2 days before my surgery. So I'm like, I'm going to set up a recording now. And like my, my new full glorious voice. Oh no, it was a disaster. Like things were just cracking, everything. I'm like, this is not going to work. So I definitely think now, like after I basically set up that recording at just that perfect time that everything was sort of recalibrating. So I'm finally on the other side of that for the most part. But so now that would be what I got my January 20th, and now we're almost at March 20th.
Yeah, so almost 8 weeks.
Yeah, I'd say like 8 weeks till like now I feel like now I could go out and sing in public. But I don't know, Leah, what did you feel?
So I did sing immediately, but if you're familiar with contemporary worship music, we're not talking, this is not Puccini, this is not Mozart, this is not Bach, it's not demanding for the voice, narrow range kind of a thing. So it was not an issue. And it was easier. So I had like a very parallel experience to Julia, which was the first 2 weeks, I was so preoccupied, I guess, by how many things were easier. And then the real work started, if I can say that. So that kind of rebuilding, there's a rebuilding. It's not from scratch, but there is a rebuilding that takes place. So my advice, I am in a period right now with my singing that I didn't have anything on my plate. So I had the space to do it. I would, if I were in a season of performing, I would definitely say take 8 weeks. Take 8 weeks and really work on your voice during that time. Work with a coach, work with your voice teacher. Do that. I would say most people need 8 to 12 weeks. If you have a demanding gig, if you have a recital, if you have a concert, if you have a role that you're doing, 8 weeks probably, if you're working, consistently.
That's what I think too. I think 8 weeks, like it's because you will feel so much freedom. There is, and I said to my teacher, I was like, this is what this feels like. I have so much more range of motion. Now I don't know where to drive the car. Because it's like, it can go here, it can go here. It's going all over the place. Like, who knows where? And so there is a freedom in that because finally nothing felt restricted, but it was cracking a lot, and definitely like, especially in my upper range, like things were like not going, like it was easy, but it was sounding really weird. Like before, the only one, like my right one, there was only one choice because everything else felt horrible. So I always went to the one that felt right, and that was also the one that sounded right. So I never had choices. Now this one, I'm like, well, now everything feels right. So I don't know what to do. So that took a little bit of time to find that. I don't know, Leah, did you feel that was similar?
Yeah. So, yes. I would say that almost my voice felt anchorless. And let me kind of explain what I mean by that. Because there was so much weight associated with my singing, like always. I didn't even know it was weight, but in hindsight, I can see that it was weight because there was weight, because there was like one right way that I could sing effectively. Once I had the release done, it was like I had all of this voice banging around in this empty space. Like I didn't feel any of the restrictions that I had. And so it was very similar. Like, okay, how much breath pressure do I actually need now? Support even felt different because when that tongue tie is released, it can release like a lot of fascia tension in the body. It can release muscular tension. So even with breathing, I felt less resistance, like on inhalation. Like the air wanted to come in the body now rather than me pulling it. I always felt like I had to kind of drag it in. So my upper register was instantaneously easy, like that thing that we talked about earlier. Like all of a sudden I had an instinct for how to release the weight and how to make that adjustment into the upper register. But also, also as I have been singing, I have realized the years of compensatory muscular habits that I've developed that have served me, like have enabled me to sing, but they don't serve now that I'm free. So those, and sometimes it was like, it felt like it got worse before it got better, if that makes sense. So it's been a lot of exploration. So, yeah, I mean, I'm still in awe of the things that are so much easier now. Like I don't even have to think about them, things that I would have to focus on so hard for it to happen. I'm still in awe of that, but coordination is different now for me. So it's not like I haven't changed my technical objectives, but the way I get there is adjusting now.
Yeah. And Kristen, also, like, I would just say, I'm like a Virgo, so I always really, like, I'm just a perfectionist about everything. I would say if I didn't have like a demanding operatic role, I probably could have sung in the 2-month period. Like if it was just a matter of singing, like, something simple, like a simple recital or something like that that didn't demand like full on range dynamics and all of that, I would have felt comfortable singing right away. So like
I guess it's one of these things that's kind of difficult to gauge also because things are more difficult right now with the tongue tie. Think about it and I'm like, oh, maybe this, like if I have a concert or something, it would be more difficult. But then after, what if it, I don't know if this is making sense, but I guess I'm thinking from like a perspective of like the difficulty I would have now doing it versus after, which I know the difficulties will maybe be different.
Yeah, it will. Totally. And it depends like where you are feeling. Like if you feel really confident in whatever it is coming up, like you're like, oh, I can sing this in my sleep right now, then just do it before the surgery. But if it's something that you're like, this is on the edge, and it is coming up a little bit later, like then maybe you want to do the surgery as soon as possible. And then, just rework like crazy, because you will have so much more freedom. That's not the problem, I think. I mean, Leah, we'll talk about this. The freedom is not the problem. Everything will feel easy and you'll be able to do things you couldn't even do, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily like the right vowel color or like the right, like it just, you'll have to play around now with your new space and how you're forming things. Because so for it to sound even, let's put it that way. It's not that like it won't work. It just won't sound like there's one voice and there's another. Like what happened? That was the way it was for me in that weird period. I don't know. Yeah, if that's how. Did you feel a little bit like that?
Yeah. So right. Certain things were super easy, but the consistency of tone throughout suffered a little bit actually. After the release, again, that's evening out as I work. But Yeah, I'm also a perfectionist. So if I knew I could sing the role or the concert or whatever, if I knew I could sing it well, even if it was hard, I would probably go with the devil I know before having the release. Just because everyone is different, everyone's rate of healing is different. And so not knowing how I would respond, I'm not a risk taker though. So as my husband informs me regularly, I'm not a risk taker. I tend to play things safe. So I want to know, and insofar as I can with a live art form, but I want to know that I can give my best. And so accepting that, okay, I have this tongue tie, maybe if I had this if I had it released and I were doing this role in 6 months, it would be better in 6 months than it is now. Okay. But that's just something you have to choose for yourself. I think, what are your priorities? So.
Yeah. And what's your risk? What's your risk tolerance?
Risk factor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you're doing a show, if you're doing something for a new company you've never worked with before, but you'd love to work with again, that kind of thing. And they liked you enough to hire you. Yeah, they liked the way you're singing right now enough to hire you. I'd wait, but that's just me.
Yes, exactly. Okay, Celeste asked a really good question. How have you each approached this readjustment rebuilding period? Has it been kind of a trial and error, starting with your previous technique and adjusting as you go? Or are you using any particular exercises or techniques in a more strategic way? Okay, Leah.
Okay, so my basic approach has been to sing and see where things fall. So to approach my practice and rep work very similar to the way that I have in the past. But then let my voice be the thing that dictates what direction I go from there. So doing the thing I know how to do, if that makes sense, and then exploring from there. So I would say that one of my weaknesses as a singer is that I don't love trial and error working. I like to have a process. I like to know when I do this, this is helping me achieve a particular end. So I'm actually learning a lot about exploring and just in the enjoyment of exploring with my voice. I don't know if that's a nature or nurture thing. The fact that my voice really wasn't capable of a lot of exploration before this, I don't know if that's created a resistance in me to that, but I have been trying to explore more, but I have been focusing a lot on exercises that serve muscular isolation. So I talked about this a little bit on my Facebook page, but things that will strengthen the function at the back of the tongue, so that it elevates properly. One of the beautiful things about the release is that when I move my tongue now, it doesn't destabilize my larynx. So that's a huge benefit. But that doesn't mean that my tongue wants to go automatically into the right position. So I have been working with that a lot. So the other thing is that for a lot of people with tongue tie, they develop a lot of jaw tension, because if you release the jaw fully, if you have a tongue tie, the tip of the tongue cannot make contact with the roof of the mouth for pronouncing certain sounds or certain consonants. So I was constantly kind of, as a singer, kind of guarding how far I dropped my jaw based on whatever sounds I had to create. So because of that, my muscle memory when I sing is to hold the jaw. So I'm doing a lot to try and retrain that muscle memory. So I would say that's a big focus for me right now. I am not necessarily doing exercises that I've never done before. I'm doing some exercises now that I've been introduced to in the past that have never worked for me before. I'm doing a lot of humming. For me, humming is really helpful in finding a good balance of breath pressure, so that I'm not using too much breath pressure, because that's my MO. My go-to has always been to use too much breath pressure. So, and I do believe that's because of the resistance of the tongue, but I'm learning with the hum to find a better balance for that. And so I'm doing that a lot. I am doing a lot of exercises just with rolling the tongue as I sing, just up and forward, just to keep it free, that sort of a thing. So that's what I'm doing. I am working with my husband right now. He's a vocal coach, knows my voice better than just about anybody. So we're working, kind of on a weekly basis through things like that. So I am trying to be pretty systematic about it. I'm doing a mixture of old rep and new rep right now. New rep to kind of just find out like where my voice is starting at right now. Like when I pick up a new piece of music, where's the technique starting at? But I'm also trying to rework some, arias and things that have been, my go-tos for a few years now, so that they feel as free, as the rest of what I'm doing. So some new stuff and some reworking.
Yeah. I would say for me, I did a lot of this tongue work that Leah's talking about pre-surgery. Like so obsessive, but I constantly felt like I had to keep doing it. Like it wasn't like I could set it and forget it,
and it would stay.
And it would stay, right? So I was very conscious always of my tongue. Now I'm finding the muscle memory is there, so I don't have to think as much about it. I will say for me, the cracking of the registers has been the hugest thing. Celeste, I don't know if you've seen some of my other stuff, but I'm really like a big proponent of the whistle register. And for years, I was trying to figure out how I could somehow get my whistle register and sort of join it with the rest of my voice. And I just didn't see how that was physically possible. Now, post tongue tie restriction, I mean, it's going to take me probably a year to do this. I really think it's going to take me a while, but now I can feel the path. It is there and it will join. And so that's been something that's been like a weird, I don't sing that kind of rep, but it's just like a weird guilty pleasure of mine. That's something that I'm personally working on just because it's cool. So very slowly, basically taking my phonation down to the smallest sliver until it will join with that whistle register. So that's been something that I'm doing. The other thing that I've noticed is my instincts pre-tongue tie were actually right. It's just I couldn't do it. So I would constantly want to put my mouth in a certain position. I would want to do something and it just it wouldn't work. And what my hypothesis is, because we're talking about how these muscles, Leah, you got your genoglossus cut as well. Like it wasn't just, right? Didn't you have the muscle cut as well? Yeah, me too. Okay, so we both had like the posterior tie and they actually ended up cutting into the muscle a little bit so we could get that full release. So what I hypothesize is that because there was that restriction on the hyoid bone, in order for the tongue to sort of be out of the airway, we had to sort of sit the tongue up, which does create a micro pressure and a micro pull on that hyoid bone and kind of creates a little bit, just enough, but it's like you got to choose, right? Because you can't be without a compensation when you have a tongue tie. Sorry, like you can't.
Yeah, right.
So you have to choose which one is going to give you your desired result. And for me, high notes were more important. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to anchor my voice this way. And the high was always working. But then when I would come down, because there was that micro pull on the hyoid bone, I would lose the low, or I would just have to barrel into chest. Like there was no smooth transition. It was like either nothing or like, right? Like just one or the other. So, but I kind of dealt with that because I'm like, I'd rather have gleaming top notes than than squeezed whatever. So that was my particular choice. What's happened since the surgery is that now I can still have those gleaming top notes and I come down and those low notes are right there now. There's no weird adjustment. That's really exciting to me. The thing also that I think has been a big thing is the adjustment of my embouchure. So of course I work these muscles. I'm a big believer in keeping these zygomatic muscles engaged at all times. Before the tongue tie, I think because of where my larynx had to sit at a slightly higher position for these top notes to work, I had to give a little bit more snarl than I'm finding I have to now, because now the larynx is naturally sitting lower without the tension on it. So I don't have to give the same kind of as drastic of a pull up here as I still have to maintain that. I can't drop it, right? But I don't have to do that. And my O's and oo vowels can be a little bit more pure. The head tone is something that, for whatever reason, I think just from years of incorrect use, I have to reinforce that every single day. And especially right now in this weird cracking period, every day I wake up and I'm like finding that head tone, making sure that I'm not bringing, that like old function, right? So it really does feel like a flip, kind of a switch, and that takes some getting used to with the new laryngeal position, if that makes sense. So I'm not thinking lowering my larynx, it just is lower.
It just is.
Yeah, exactly.
This kind of, you said something and it made me think. So I had the lip tie. You talk about like an engagement in these muscles in the face. I never could get those muscles. I would think about like a lift. I would think, about an activation there. And because I was so tethered here, it just would feel like nothing, like I couldn't do anything. And that is actually something that has made a big difference in my sound since the lip tie is released, is that I can breathe in and I can activate those muscles, and all of a sudden there's just so much more of that forward ring, but it's not, I don't feel like I'm producing it artificially. I always felt like there was some amount of manipulation to create a truly forward resonant sound, however you like to describe it. But that we want for the voice to carry and for clarity, and now it's there, but I don't have to manipulate and maneuver it so much. It's just more about setting up the space, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I also will say, like, my second passaggio, that upper passaggio right now, that is the place that I'm having to pay a lot of attention to. But whereas before, weirdly enough, my upper passaggio felt, I had figured out a way where that was like easier, but I think I was still too pressurized because of the restriction. And so now, without the restriction, I have to depressurize that or it doesn't blend with the top. It sounds very strange. So that's something I've really been working on too in the rebuilding process.
yeah, same. So if you've ever read Renee Fleming's book, her biography that she wrote, she talks about her voice like an hourglass, like the upper voice, and then going through that upper passaggio, it's like that really narrow part of the hourglass, and then it kind of opens up again. And I always read that, I was like, what is she talking about? That is weird. Of course, it's all like sensation based, right? So what one singer feels, another may not. But actually now that really precise, depressurized way of moving up through that passaggio, I'm feeling the need for that now. That's kind of for me where the humming comes in. Right now, I mean, we had talked about whistle stop. So your techniques with whistle stop may also be very helpful for somebody trying to build that back into their voice. But anyway, yeah, same. That passaggio is a tricky spot now.
Yeah. Dimitra, do you want to?
Yeah, I have a couple questions actually for Leah.
Yes.
Talking about the lip tie, who was the person that discovered that? I mean, you said it was a dental hygienist who discovered the tongue tie, but the lip tie, it's a whole.
It was the same. So she also looked when she looked in my mouth, she looked under my tongue, and then she also just checked my lips. She was in myofunctional training at the time. And so she had just been kind of turned on to all of these things. And so she checked both. She checked both for me in that visit.
And how did you find a myofunctional therapist?
Okay, so that's a great question. I called Dr. Baxter's office and talked with them. I said, I've been diagnosed with a tongue tie. I would like to schedule a release. And they said, okay, we don't do release procedures on adults unless they have been through myofunctional therapy. So they sent me a list of their recommended myofunctional therapists, and that's where I found my myofunctional therapist. We do virtual work. There is a great page on Facebook. It's called Adult Tongue Tie Support. And there is a list, you just get lots of helpful things on that page, but they also publish a list of providers. So Zoggy trained providers who do releases, but also myofunctional therapists that are just really good at what they do. So Jennifer's on that. She's my myofunctional therapist. There's a lot of people that work virtually, so that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. And this question is kind of for both of you. You know, as singers who have, especially Julia, you talked about your obsession with your tongue, and you're very, very aware of it, and it was very well exercised. How is that different than working with a myotherapist? Like, you know, I'm hearing, it sounds like both of you are doing a lot of myotherapy, not just like the, like when I talk to Amanda, she also has a little package where it's just for people who want the tongue tie surgery, which is only, I can't remember what the total is, but it's like 6 weeks or I don't know, something like that. Much, much more limited than what either of you are doing. So I guess my question is, why so much therapy when you already have an athletic tongue, basically?
Well, because I'll tell you, Demetra, right now, here's my exercise. These are my exercises this week. Okay. I have to hold my tongue like this for 20 seconds without it quivering, and I still can't do it. So I also have to do this. Okay. And I have to hold that for like 30 seconds. So these are things that, these are like areas I didn't even know existed, like muscles I didn't know, movements I didn't know. And I'm still like, I'm just the type, I like to go looking for the dirty closet. That's just my personality. So I wasn't wanting to say, okay, yeah, I think my tongue is good enough. Like, I'm like, I want to go to the absolute end and find the holes, find the problems. And so like every week there's at least one exercise that I can't do that well. And then I build up that strength, and then I find that it's actually helping something in my singing. Or, I mean, I don't know directly, but the whole process has been helping. So that's why I think for me, that's been the right choice, but it may not be the right choice for everybody, but that's, you know, I'm just like, this is my life and I'm obsessed with it. So that's probably why.
So I had a lot of improper function in my tongue. Like I didn't swallow correctly. My tongue always sat on the floor of my mouth before myofunctional therapy. To create certain consonants, I would actually move my tongue in the exact opposite way that it was supposed to be moved. So myofunctional therapy is like working, it's like correcting the day-to-day function of your tongue. It's also, for me, it's also a process of releasing, working the muscles that are designed to work for that particular function while releasing the muscles around it that have always helped. You know, jaw muscles, neck muscles that have always helped my body perform certain functions that my tongue could not do on its own. So the myofunctional therapy, while there is some overlap with what I'm working on in my singing, the myofunctional therapy is more about basic health and proper use of the tongue, like when I eat, when I drink, when I sleep, these kinds of things. And then, you know, the vocal things, for me, that's about establishing a new muscle memory, new muscular strength in the tongue, in the areas where it needs to be strong for singing, where it needs for freedom to be able to operate in a certain way. And that's also a process of activation in certain new places for me and release in other places. So there are similarities, but they're kind of accomplishing different purposes for me right now.
Yeah, and Leah makes a really good point about this, because Demetra, I don't know if you remember, because I think we were in touch before I got the surgery. The reason why I wanted to get the surgery almost had nothing to do with my voice. It was because of this horrible neck tension that I had, like awful, and it just wouldn't go away. And so with the surgery, it's gone away. But like Leah said, there's functions there from years of misuse that, like, I have no idea what exactly. And you know, she described that one exercise with like the pulling of the button, like things like that.
Yes.
Would you even think to like move your mouth in that way? You wouldn't, right? So yeah, all of these things really help your sleeping. Like I've been sleeping a lot better. I wake up, I mean, I do tape my mouth shut at night with myotape, but I now get a better sleep because my mouth isn't hanging over and my tongue is on the roof of my mouth. And all of that has to do with the work that you're doing. My husband still asks, he's like, when are you doing the session on eating? Because he says I don't eat properly, that I like eat with my mouth open. Yeah, just like, that's next session. We'll get to it.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, Nola.
So I'm wondering too, I think both Leah and Julia have mentioned at various times the chin pulling forward as a tongue tie thing. And I definitely am a chin puller. And I guess I'm wondering, did you find post-op that, I guess since that's kind of a larger body posture thing, has that had some correction, or is that something you need to incorporate into larger body work?
You know, it's funny, Nola, because I was thinking about this just a couple days ago. Like before, when I would sit with my head forward, like this kind of forward to sort of get rid of this, whatever, I would feel that was natural. And then going back, like felt kind of restricted and like tense. Now it's the opposite. Like I'm still having this bad habit of like doing this, but this doesn't feel right anymore. Now, like to relax, I need to go back into this posture. I do think I've been using this cervical, look, I will get this so you can see this. I've been laying on this thing to like restore the C curve in my neck. So I do this like maybe 10 minutes a day, twice a day. I've been doing that and that's really helped. I do yoga, but honestly, I think the body knows how to rearrange itself. So if you're doing good practices in general, like you will notice, and Amanda told me, she's like, sometimes even up to like a year, your body will still be readjusting. Wow. So you'll notice new things.
Okay. And I guess that's also related to, you know, the more I've read too about all the digestive issues that can be related. And I also am not a great sleeper and have some kind of just general like tight, like tension issues through my hips and legs and everything. And I guess I'm just curious if either of you have noticed big changes with that.
So I had a chronic kind of, I had really good posture, like in certain ways, but when I breathed, I would lean forward like this. And I would wake up in the middle of the night like this, just constantly before my release. Once my release happened at night, that went away totally. That went away totally. I will say that I still have a muscle memory when I breathe for singing to want to lean forward a little bit, but my experience is identical to Julia's. It feels all wrong. Where before I didn't even notice it. I didn't even feel it when I did it. And it definitely didn't feel out of place. Now to do that, I feel so much stress on the back of the neck when I do that. Okay. So much pressure. I had chronic migraines before release procedure, I think caused by that, particularly because of sleeping in that position. That is, I am having to train it out, but it's like my body wants to train it out, if that makes sense. My body's not fighting me about that. So yeah, definitely. I think if you go through the release, you're going to see a difference in that for sure.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
and Nola, I think I told you too, like, remember I said it right after the surgery, I literally felt like this whole right side of my body that it felt like it was pulling up from the heel all the way through the like
Mhm.
hip into here. It just like released. It was like all of a sudden gone in a minute. Now, after that, like initial, there's that line of tension. Now my muscles want to keep going back to that same position, but that line, whatever that pull was, is gone.
Okay, wow.
So, and like Leah says, my body's wanting to train out now those things. But I do train with Chris twice a week with the musical athlete. So he does a lot of like resetting of rebalancing my right side pulls. So I do think that is helping me also
Okay.
regain a lot of, a lot of balance in my body.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do recommend you'll see this a lot, body work, if you can afford it, to work with somebody who does fascial release, myofascial release, to work with an osteopath or a good chiropractor. I go to a chiropractor here, and that has been really helpful in helping the muscles release because what often happens, and I think most people have this experience, is immediately after the surgery, it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm 2 inches taller. My head feels lighter, like everything feels so much more buoyant in the body. But then it's like the muscles kind of go into a little bit of a shock and they kind of want to return to where they've always been. So you can feel some contracting again and some kind of compression. So body work, particularly post-release, I think is really, really beneficial and helpful. So, to find somebody who is sensitive to that kind of thing, if you can in your area, I think is a benefit.
Yeah, I do. I think actually I should say I did that too. Right after I was going to this guy like once a week for I think 5 weeks. I went right after my surgery and it was very helpful. But I do think like we're saying all of the, you got to get a myofunctional therapist, you got to get this, you got to get that. Everybody's like, oh my God, I can't do all of that.
Right.
Like really the bottom line is this, you're singers. So if you're looking at the price tag and you're like, oh my God, I can't like do all of this stuff. I think that there is a way I'm not saying do the minimum, I'm saying do the maximum, but you might have to do a little more self-work, a little more work on your own and a little more research. I will just say, this is like, I'm going to commit myself because now I'm live on Facebook and I'm going to say this, but I'm going to be developing a program specifically to help people like through this transition. And it's going to be like a kind of an open enrollment. So one of my big goals is to make this affordable for singers and also get the maximum benefit out of it. So that just know that is something that's in development, and that would include a team of people to be working with. So that's now I announced it, so they're actually
right. Now you put it out there, it's immortalized on social media, so
exactly.
got to do it.
Exactly. Hold myself accountable right there. But yeah, it can be intimidating with all of these things. And they are like, all of these issues do need to be addressed. But if you can take personal responsibility for a lot of them, there is a lot that can be done by like learning something, and then applying it on your own. So,
yep.
So does anybody have any other questions? No?
This has been so informational. Thank you so much to both of you.
Oh, you're welcome.
No problem.
You're welcome. Leah, anything you want to add? Anything you want to let people know about?
No, I mean, you guys are all invited to follow me on Diary of a Tongue-Tied Singer. I'm not posting quite as often now as I was like right at the beginning, but still posting content there. Also, I'm going to be interviewing Julia, so kind of doing the reverse of what we did today in 2 weeks on Instagram. So I have an Instagram page. It's really for resources for voice teachers and singers. It's not all about tongue ties, but that's a major talking point for me, obviously. But Julia's going to be there in a couple weeks. So it's just Leah Stewart-Hill, LeahStewart-Hill, no spaces. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll get prompts and things like that. So I'm super excited about that because I think it's awesome. I just kind of spread the word. If you're having it done, talk about it, make some noise about it. I think in 10 years, this will be common knowledge for voice teachers. I think now we have a big job with making some noise about it so people listen and think about like, this is really important. I think this is information every voice teacher should know. Absolutely. Because I think it's going to open up an entirely new possibilities for us helping singers that we've never been able to really help before in a major way. So
yeah. And I do think that is something very important to say, because when you're, right now this is so new, and so that there's so much that's not known yet about this. So if you're going to get this done, you know that you're going to be on like the forefront.
Yeah, you're on the cusp, right?
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of trial and error, a lot of experimentation, and I would say like really play around with your voice afterwards. Like see what it can do. Don't expect it that you have the same limitations. Don't even expect that you're going to sing necessarily the same repertoire. A lot of things might open up to you, and the more you can play around, I think the more you will find. Also, voice students. 4 years ago, when I was trying teachers before choosing a school for my master's, somebody told me about my tongue tie and I had never heard it. And because I hadn't heard of it, I thought she was crazy for telling me to cut my tongue. Oh, wow. Yeah, and what's interesting too, Kristen, is like there are teachers that do know about this, but they don't necessarily know like how to discuss it, or like why it's like how to explain it so that you would be like, yeah, okay, I need to get that done. So I think now with the, there's that intuitive knowledge, like, yeah, you need to get that done. But now there's hopefully going to be more actual knowledge and actual evidence to support why these things are so important for singers.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right, well, if you guys don't have other questions, then we will sign off and see you all. Please feel free. I'm going to post some resources down below on the Facebook Live. Please feel free to reach out to either of us. Our doors are open. Yeah.
Anytime.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Amazing. Thank you.
Bye.